Hey, what's going on, y'all, man? So I'm here to give y'all that content I was talking about, but it's not really gonna be laid out like the typical episodes are. So primarily, we're gonna be focused on boxing this episode. That's what I was. That's what all my notes were covering before taking this trip and coming out here for training. That being said, well, man, let's just hop right into it, man. So, boxing world has it's a lot of different things going on across all weight divisions. Um, I can't even say what's more important right now because there are a lot of things shaking up, and they all affect the boxing world in different ways that equally important depending on which division you prefer and who you're a fan of. So let's start with possibly one of the bigger, well, yeah, most definitely bigger headlines. So last month, April 21st, it's a Saturday, last Saturday of August, I believe, Manny Pacquiao fought Yordenis Ugas. If you don't know Yordenis Ugas, it's because you're not a hardcore boxing fan. But hardcore boxing fans know who Yordenis Ugas is. He's a good boxer. He's decent. Not superstar. I say his record is something like 27 wins, 12 knockouts, I believe. So not a really big puncher, but he is a good boxer. He's definitely a good boxer. He wasn't supposed to fight Manny Pacquiao this past August. He was actually a replacement for Errol Spence, who wasn't able to fight on that night due to an eye injury he suffered in training camp. So while sparring, he suffered a detached retina. After a sparring session, he got an opinion from 2 to 3 doctors. I know he did at least 2 because I've seen the reports. Earl's come forward. He's shown the reports. And so he got more than one opinion because he really wanted that fight. It's Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao's lost, 7, 8 times? I think 8 times now. I think he's lost 8 times now. But regardless of the fact, he's a Hall of Famer, no questions asked. Still boxing at the age of 42. It was a great fight for Errol Spence. Great legacy fight. Because Manny Pacquiao just beat Keith Thurman, who was undefeated at the time and holder of I believe the WBA. He held the WBA. He was undefeated. He beat him back in July 2019. But that fight was 2 years ago. And he hadn't fought since then. He's balancing a boxing career and the life of a politician back home in the Philippines. He's a senator there. That all being said, it was a great fight to be made. Earl couldn't make the fight due to an injury. There was a lot of commotion surrounding that. People trying to say Earl was trying to back out of the fight, which, when you know boxing and you know Earl, you just know that's not the case. Errol Spence has not run from or ducked anybody. He's even hinted at the fact that after fighting everybody he can fight in the welterweight division, that he's possibly moving up to middleweight and looking for a fight with Canelo Alvarez because he's the best. He's the best middleweight around. That being said, he couldn't make that fight. Ugas was his replacement. I don't want to say Ugas is a journeyman because his record is like 27 wins, 2 or 3 losses. So he's got a really good record and he's a really good boxer. Ugas was actually supposed to be like a co-main event because he was deemed the WBA champion. Manny Pacquiao was stripped of the belt by the WBA association due to inactivity, and so Ugas was given the belt by the WBA. And the WBA they wanted to make this fight between him and Errol a unification fight, so they were gonna give Pacquiao the belt back, but they had to figure out some type of way to compensate Ugas. And ultimately, it's actually hard to remember because they swayed so much throughout the proceedings before the fight. I can't remember who actually walked into the fight as the WBA champion, whether it was Ugas or whether it was Manny Pacquiao. Either way it goes, April 21st, August 21st, 2021, Pacquiao and Ugas both enter the ring, and when the night was over with, Ugas walks away the winner, handing Pacquiao his 8th career loss, and Ugas was then crowned, then rightfully crowned WBA champion, and it wasn't really a close fight. Not in my opinion. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, he didn't knock Pacquiao out. It was a 12th round decision win. But Pacquiao just didn't have an answer for Ugas that night. He did not have the answer. There was not enough. It's not enough head movement. Not enough. His defense wasn't good enough. He just couldn't stay away from that jab. Ugas was the bigger fighter. Pacquiao was about 5'5". Ugas is, I believe 5'9", somewhere between 5'8" and 5'10". Longer arms. Pacquiao only has a 67-inch reach. Ugas had a much better reach than Pacquiao, and so he was popping him with the jab all night to set up his power punches. And Pacquiao just didn't show the lateral movement. He didn't show the defensive wit to create counterpunch opportunities, and Ugas walked away the winner from this fight. I believe they're in negotiations for a rematch, and I believe it's supposed to happen as soon as this January 2022, which is really soon. There is a lot of time in terms of training. Seems kind of soon. And in hindsight, to their fight, I mean, with the way Pacquiao struggled against Ugas, I mean, you just have to know it would have been a wash if Earl would have been able to step in the ring that night. Like, I think Earl is 5'9". Can't say what his reach is, but as far as boxing skill goes, he is technically sound. Earl Spence, you'd be hard pressed to find another boxer that surpasses Earl Spence in technical skills. He has good defense, great chin, good jab. He came into his boxing career, he made a name for himself, just crushing most of his opposition with good body work. I believe he's at 28 wins. 21 or 22 knockouts. So really high knockout ratio. Hard to beat. Earl Spence is hard to beat. Closest fight. Well, he's had 2 close fights in his career, and that was against Kell Brook, which he beat to become a one-time champion, and Sean Porter back in 2019, which was that fight was way closer than what I imagined that it would be. Sean really put the pressure on Earl, took him out of his comfort zone, and really pressed the fight. Earl walked away with the win, and so Earl walked away from the win with that fight. forgot where I was going with this. Oh, I mean, it just speaks to the point that he's a really good boxer. So he's extremely hard to beat. He's appeared never to been hurt in the ring. He's never been knocked down. So with the way Manny Pacquiao struggled with Ugas, I really believe it would have been a wash. I believe that before the fight, just because of the size difference, the skill that Errol has to box. The last guy to try to disrespect his skills, he gave him a thorough boxing lesson. And that being Mikey Garcia when he faced him back in, I believe 2018. If it wasn't 2019, I believe it was 2018. He faced him March of 2018. If it was 2018, and if it wasn't, it was March 2019. Either way, he faced Mikey Garcia. And he said before the fight he's gonna put his boxing skills on display, and that's exactly what he did. From rounds 1 through 12, he just outboxed Mikey Garcia. He was bigger than Mikey Garcia, stronger than Mikey Garcia, and he just outboxed him. I mean, he made it really hard for Mikey to even consider throwing a punch. He just constant pressure and just boxed his way to a clear win. So if anybody did doubt him and thought that he just a big strong guy that was walking guys down and was an inside fighter, he showed that he can box, and he can box very well. Moving on. So that being the welterweight division. Oh, well, not moving on from the welterweight division just yet. So it's the biggest fight to be made in like all of boxing is Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. Now this fight is yet to be made, mainly because Terrence Crawford is signed with Top Rank, which is run by Bob Arum, and most boxers that are welterweights are signed with Al Heyman and PBC. So it's really hard for those guys to come to any type of agreement that both sides like to make a fight happen. So that fight has not happened yet. And to be honest, I'm not mad it hasn't happened yet, because both of these guys are still in their prime. And there were other fights I felt needed to happen before we get that mega fight between these two. Like, there are other guys that, namely Earl, that I wanted to see him fight before we get to Crawford and Spence. Just because, I mean, it'd be anticlimactic for the two best guys in the division to fight each other and they hadn't went through everybody else in the division. I mean, you feel it in your heart. You see the gap in the skill that they so you just believe it in your heart that they can walk through those other guys, but you never know in boxing. You really don't. I mean, the Porter and the Spence fight was way closer than what I imagined it being, and without that knockdown that Earl scored late in that fight, I'm not sure he wins the fight. It possibly ends in a draw. Possibly ends in a draw if he doesn't get that knockdown. That fight was really close. But yeah, that's the biggest fight that most boxing fans feel can be made is Crawford and Spence. So now, that being said, Crawford is now facing Porter this November 20th in Las Vegas. And this, initially I didn't want to see this, but I do feel like it'll be a really good fight, especially after seeing how Porter pressed Spence to fight a different fight. I really feel like this can be a really good fight. Now, I do feel like Crawford can stop. I do feel like he could stop Porter. At least I did feel like he could stop. What the possibility is there. He could stop Porter. It's a strong possibility. He fights in both orthodox and southpaw stance, has power in both hands. He's smart. One of the best boxers. One of the best modern day boxers. One of the best active boxers. Very smart inside of that ring. Calculating. Relentless. Tactical. So he could definitely stop Shawn Porter. Now, the interesting aspect is how he does it with that pressure that Shawn Porter puts into all of his fights. Shawn Porter is in your face the entire fight. Shawn Porter presses the fight with in big fights. He presses the fight in most fights, but he definitely presses in big fights. And he's not that tall, so he's usually the smaller fighter, so he has no choice but to press the fight, because he's not gonna win a boxing match against a good boxer like Earl or even Crawford. He's not gonna outbox Crawford. He doesn't have the reach. He's shorter. He has a shorter reach, so he has to press that fight on the inside, which is what he really does. He makes the fights very physical. He's in your face the entire fight. He doesn't allow you to rest. So this is going to be interesting to see how Terence Crawford adapts to this type of pressure, because we've never seen him fight a fighter like we've never seen him fight a pressure fighter like Shawn Porter. Crawford has fought some good opposition. The problem that most people have with his resume is the fact that a lot of the guys that he's fought are not world-class fighters, and are not well known within the boxing community. Victor Postal, good boxer, but not well known in mainstream media. Victor Postal, David Benavidez, not the super middleweight, obviously, because these guys are middleweights, but David Benavidez. I won't say Jeff Horn, because everybody should have known of him by the time Crawford got to him, since he beat Manny Pacquiao a year prior and took the belt from Manny Pacquiao, which it couldn't have been the WBA. It couldn't be the WBA. It could not have been the WBA. But he took a belt from Manny Pacquiao. Crawford fights him like a year or so later, strips him of that belt, which he now carries. It's hard to think of his opponents, because to my point, he hasn't fought a lot of guys that are well known by mainstream, just mainstream media. Not to say that they aren't good fighters, but it's hard to gauge how good a fighter is when you don't know who he is. There's not much film of who he's fought. He doesn't, you just can't see what his track record is. You pull up videos of any superstar. I mean, you type in any superstar or boxer's name, and you're gonna find film of his past fights. You're gonna see fights of other superstars he fought and guys that weren't superstars. So you're gonna be able to see that track record. We just didn't know what a lot of these guys that Crawford was fighting, but a lot of them were good fighters. He beat all of them, because Crawford is undefeated. But he went into deep waters with quite a few of those guys. Let's see. Some more noteworthy wins as far as name is concerned would be Kell Brook, which he defeated, which was actually his last opponent. That may have been early this year, late last year, sometime this past winter. They had a bout. Kell Brook, he defeated Amir Khan back in 2019. What else does he beat? We named Jeff Horn. Dave Benavidez. Yuri Gosh, I'm killing his name. Yuriorkis Gamboa. And if I wasn't on cam, I could say his first name correctly. I don't understand what's going on. Anyway, Yuriorkis Gamboa. Wow, that is terrible. I'm not okay. He beat Gamboa, but he also got hurt by Gamboa in that fight. They didn't fight at welterweight. They were fighting at I think that was a fight at lightweight, possibly junior welterweight. That's either 130 or 135. One of those weights they had a fight. He got hurt in the first half of the fight. He recovered, and he came out and came back out, and he hurt Gamboa a couple times in that fight and put him on the canvas, and eventually got the knockdown in that fight. I haven't really seen him hurt since then. Haven't seen him hurt since that fight, but we know he can be touched. You know, I mean, anybody can be touched, but you don't have proof of that until you actually see him hurt. He was visibly hurt in that fight, so you know he can be touched. And that was at a smaller weight, and now he's fighting at 147 with guys that are bigger, guys that are stronger than the opposition that he was fighting at a couple of years ago. Porter is one of those guys. He's a pressure fighter, man. So I mean, that punch could come from anywhere. So that's gonna be a really interesting fight. I cannot wait to see that fight. Moving up to the middleweight division. So the biggest fight that we have on the itinerary, we have Caleb Sweet Hands Plant versus Canelo Saul Alvarez. Caleb Plant is the IBF champion with 21 wins, 0 losses, 0 draws, 12 wins by way of knockout. Canelo Alvarez is the WBA, the WBC, the Ring Magazine, and the WBO champions, super middleweight champion, with a record of 56 wins, 2 draws, 1 loss, 38 wins by way of knockout. Okay, so a lot of Canelo was very well known, even outside of boxing, I would say. The sport is trying to paint him as the next big thing in boxing. He had a massive multi-million-dollar deal with DAZN. I think it was like a 6-fight deal, somewhere around. You know what? I'm not even gonna estimate, but it was a lot of money. I believe it was over 50 million. So yeah, and he's ranked as the number one. He's ranked as the best middleweight by numerous boxing outlets, and he's also ranked as the best fighter pound for pound by a lot of major boxing outlets. So they're making Canelo out to be the next best thing. Caleb Plant, 21 wins, IBF champ. I believe he's been IBF champ since 2019 when he defeated Jason Rosario, who had just won the IBF belt in his previous fight, and then to lose it a fight later. Disappointing, but he was a really good fighter. Tough fight. That fight went the distance between Rosario and Plant. Plant got the nod, and it's kept up that undefeated win streak. And now Alvarez has been on a quest to unify the middleweight division, and Plant holds the last belt. No, he doesn't. He doesn't hold the last. Wait, are they fighting it? Plant holds the IBF. Let me pull up his weight really quick. Caleb Plant, IBF super middleweight champ. Okay, 168. Okay, Caleb Plant is at 168. Canelo is fighting at 168 as well. So yeah, this is the so these two have got to be in the super middleweight division. It's the middleweight division would be 154. Between 154, I believe between 154 and 160. Okay. All right. So yeah, Plant and Alvarez have a showdown scheduled for November 6th, 2021. It's a unification bout at super middleweight. Alvarez is most likely the favorite headed into this fight. Plant's going to be an underdog. And Plant isn't really well known by he's not going to be known by the mainstream audience. Even though he's a champ, I do believe that his fans are most likely hardcore boxing fans. Cause he hasn't fought anybody on. This is the biggest fight of his career. So this is the biggest fight of his career, and it's not even the belt. It's not even because of the belts that are on the line, but because of who he's fighting in Canelo Alvarez. Caleb Plant hasn't fought anybody on the level of Canelo Alvarez. Nobody that matches his notoriety in the slightest. So this is the biggest fight of Caleb's career. If Caleb were to win this fight, it would change his life and the trajectory of boxing, I believe. Because the way that the boxing media is trying to narrate this superstar boxer, this superstar grandiose boxer in Canelo Alvarez, if Caleb were to take all of that away with a win, the sport would really change, because the media and boxing itself are investing so much into Canelo. They're putting all their chips on Canelo in everything that they do, from the fights that he's allowed to pick to the fights he's allowed to pick, what weight class he decides to champion in, and who he's allowed to avoid. Canelo hasn't fought any tough competition. The last guy Canelo fought where it was a true 50-50 fight was Gennady Triple G Golovkin. First fight ended in a draw, and the second fight ended in I believe a split decision victory. I don't think it was a unanimous decision victory, but I believe it was a split decision victory in favor of Canelo, where he got the win and he got the belt from Golovkin, and he never looked back. He didn't entertain the idea of a rematch with Golovkin. So both of those fights were really close. In that second fight, in my opinion, Canelo did seem more relaxed. He seemed, it seemed like he felt more at home in that second fight, and I believe that's due to the experience in the first fight. Canelo was very defensive in the first half of the fight. If you watch his body language, you could tell he really didn't want to take a punch from Gennady, which no boxer really wants to take a punch, but Gennady is a very big puncher. Very strong, very aggressive, pressures his opponents the entire fight. If I had to call out his weakness, I would say the lack of lateral movement. he doesn't do a good job cutting off the ring, and with a boxer like Canelo, you have to cut off the ring if you want to stop and get that body work in. You can't just follow the guy in a straight line. You have to have some lateral movement, move side to side to cut off the ring. Because if you just follow him, you allow him to lead you around the ring and continue to run away from him. But both of those fights were really close. Really hard to call. Really hard to call both of those fights. You could argue that the second fight was could have been a draw. Those were some really hard fights to call. But when it was all said and done, only the first fight was a draw. The second fight was a win for Canelo. He didn't look back, and since then, I feel like he's been cherry picking, bouncing around weight divisions, fighting guys that are on the decline or that haven't boxed in a year or so. Okay. Example. He goes up to 175 and fights the Crusher Kovalev. He fights him after he loses to Andre Ward twice. The guy's on the decline. He's approaching 40. Just not the same fight. He's not that prime fighter who earned the name the Crusher. Canelo beats him by knockout, either 11th or 12th round. All the while, beats him, drops in weight. He actually had a mandatory. He had a mandatory in either Demetrius Andrade or Jamal Charlo. And he's being coddled by the WBC because they allowed him, well, they protect him. So they won't, Canelo Alvarez is an investment for the boxing world. You take a boxer, you paint him up to be the best there is right now, and to ensure that he holds that title as the best there is right now, he has to win fights. And if you're an investor, you want the best possible return. You damn near want your return guaranteed. And how do you can't guarantee a return on a boxer because he could lose at any point in his career. So how do you remove the uncertainty of him losing? We allow him to pick his fights, or we pick his fights for him. In the Crusher Kovalev, in Avni Yildirim. Who the hell is Avni Yildirim? Never heard of this guy before it was announced that Canelo was fighting him after getting his mandatory. After the WBC changed his mandatory, it was either Demetrius Andrade or it was Jamal Charlo, and they were removed as his mandatory and replaced by Avni Yildirim, who had taken a break from boxing. And then is mandated to be Canelo's mandatory, who Canelo just washed in their fight. And now he's fighting Caleb Plant. Now Caleb Plant is no slouch, but Canelo, so I do not believe that they necessarily cherry picked this fight, but I do feel like they believe that Canelo can beat him off skill alone. So when you look at the difference in their resumes, Canelo has double the fights and then some of Caleb Plant. And regardless of the controversy around Canelo's choosing of fights, he's a really good boxer. He's a damn good boxer. His boxing skills are arguably pound for pound. His choice in opponents have been less than respectable, but you can't shade his boxing skills. The boxing skills are impeccable. So Caleb Plant is really gonna have to come with it, but he has been getting training from Andre Ward, who was seeking a fight with Canelo that he never got. So hopefully, it'll be interesting to see. It'll definitely be interesting to see. I am a fan of Caleb Plant. He has a really solid style. Not a really big puncher as far as knockouts are concerned, but he's a really good boxer. So it's going to be interesting to see. Canelo stands at 5'8". Caleb Plant stands at 6'1". So the height and reach advantage go to Caleb Plant, but height and reach don't make for an invincible fighter. Canelo has showed us that with Callum Smith, who he beat last year, I believe. Wasn't even close. And as a fan, it just pains me to see a guy with clear advantages not utilize those advantages to his benefit. I mean, Callum Smith, I believe, is 6'2". Canelo's 5'8", and he just couldn't keep Canelo off of him. I mean, if he was just to use his jab, he could have kept Canelo off of him, set up some power shots, frustrated Canelo. But I don't know, man. I can't speak to the mindset or the boxing plan that those guys have in place when they take on the assignment of Canelo, because that is a big assignment to handle. But I don't know, man. You could just give him a harder time if you just use your clear advantages. Is all I'm saying. And another reason I'm not a Canelo supporter, not an avid Canelo supporter, is the use of the scandal revolving PEDs that he had in between his fights with Gennady Golovkin. So after their first fight ended in a draw, Canelo failed a drug test approaching their rematch in 2018. Canelo failed a drug test February 17th and 20th of 2018, where clenbuterol was found to be in his system. Now his team claims that the clenbuterol was present due to Canelo ingesting contaminated meat, and they claim that it's a problem that's plagued dozens of Mexican fighters for years. And the issue I have with that statement is, if we know that clenbuterol, a banned substance by the Boxing Anti-Doping Committee, is present in our home country of Mexico, why are you not taking extra precautions to ensure that your top pound-for-pound boxer is not involved in any type of scandal like that with one of the biggest fights of his career coming up? Doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if I'm in Flint, Michigan, and I know the water there is shit, I'm not drinking out of the faucet. I'm going and getting bottled water. You know, when you know better, you do better. So it's crazy, and it's idiotic to think that you can sell me a story saying that we know about this issue. Look, we know he tested positive for clenbuterol. Don't worry about it. He didn't take the substance whole. He must have gotten it from the contaminated meat that's been plaguing our country for years. You're Canelo Alvarez. You're the top paid boxer, I believe, in the sport right now. You can afford anything you wish in your country. So why are you not selecting the best meat, free of steroids? Because if you didn't know, clenbuterol is used to treat asthma, but it also has the option to build muscle mass and burn fat. That being said, it's viewed as a potential PED and a steroid, which makes it illegal for boxers to use or to ingest. That being said, I don't it's not feasible to believe that a world-class boxer, the guy painted as the #1 pound-for-pound boxer, just is careless when it comes to what he puts in his body, when a boxer who's an athlete makes all of their income, well, most of their income, off of the work that they put in and how well they take care of their bodies. It just doesn't make sense. That's a lie. That's a liability, not anything that can harm you physically, or any a substance that is has been banned by any boxing association is a liability for you, because it can interrupt your cash flow, and it could put a halt to your career. You know, using PEDs comes with bans and suspensions. Canelo was in fact suspended for 6 months following the failing of these drug tests back in 2018, so it delayed the rematch with Golovkin, which later did happen, where Canelo came out the victor. And initially Canelo was supposed to get like a year suspension, but because of his cooperation, as I believe it was the WBC explained, they reduced it to 6 months. And Mauricio Suleiman, who is the president of the WBC, also increased the levels of clenbuterol that are allowed within a boxer system, versus holding Canelo accountable and just reinforcing the fact that the use of PEDs will not be tolerated. I mean, it sends the wrong message, but I guess it sends the right message when you're of the right persuasion. So Oscar Valdez also tested positive for a banned substance that him and his team claim were in the tea that he ingested. And initially, that was the statement. The banned substance had to come from the tea, and then his team comes back and recants and says, "Oh, well, we don't know where it came from." So I have a conflicting story. He's taking a banned substance. What PED is natural in tea, I don't know. But it's criminal that these guys are getting away with taking these PEDs, because in boxing is not a game. It's not basketball. It's not soccer. It's not baseball. Two men train to harm one another, and they are not guaranteed to walk out of that ring the same way that they walked into that ring. Boxers have died. Boxers have cheated, and boxers have paid the price for cheating. Boxers that put in the work in training camp to come defeat their opponent one-on-one have died at the hands of cheaters. So you don't play boxing. You can't pretend to box. So these guys need to be held accountable for taking PEDs, because they're in the ring, they're fighting other fighters who are testing and whose tests come back negative for PEDs, and it's unfair that guys can take PEDs and still box and still make a living, and potentially put the other guy, their opponents, at greater harm because they have an unfair advantage. That's criminal. Jarrell Big Baby Miller, African American boxer, was scheduled to fight British superstar boxer Anthony Joshua back in 2019 for his American debut. The fight didn't happen because Jarrell Big Baby Miller tested positive for PEDs. I don't believe he's fought since. I haven't seen nor heard from him since testing positive for PEDs. Canelo tested positive back in 2018. It is 2021. 2018 to 2021. Three years. 3 years ago, Canelo tested positive. Pound for pound, #1 fighter in the world. 2 years ago, Jarrell Miller tested positive. He's Danny Phantom. Oscar Valdez, 30 wins, 0 losses, 0 draws. Tested positive right before his fight with Robson Canseco. Tested positive. They don't suspend him. They don't halt the fight. They allow him to. They allow Oscar Valdez to continue to fight. He fights, boxes to a decision win, which you have to call into question. You have to call it into question. I'm hearing from the boxing community doesn't feel like Valdez won that fight. Valdez doesn't look like he won that fight. He was all beat up. But the judges scored it in his favor. So he's now 30-0. He's he's a featherweight champion. He's currently holds the WBC, but you have to call that into question when a guy tests positive for PEDs. He has an unfair advantage, and it's criminal that they even allowed him to fight. But this is what's allowed. This is what's allowed in boxing. When certain guys are given special privileges to compete, and everybody else is held to a certain standard. It creates a double standard now, because we have selected guys like Canelo and Oscar Valdez who can use PEDs, and it's a slap on the wrist, and then other guys like Jarrell Miller use PEDs and you never heard from him again. Earl Spence commented when news of this came out with Oscar Valdez, his whole scandal with PEDs. When that came out, Earl Spence tweets, "Let it have been me." And what you can insinuate from that tweet is, if it had been him that tested positive for PEDs, he would have been shamed. He would have been suspended. Probably even would have lost his boxing license. But had he tested positive for PEDs prior to his fight with prior to his fight with Pacquiao, the fight wouldn't have happened. The fight would not have happened at all. They would not have allowed that to continue. So it's shameful that this racism is. It's shameful that it's present. I think that's the most shameful aspect of it. But it also, well, I can't even say that it's I can't even say it's worse that you got guys that are getting special treatment and everybody else is, you know what I'm saying? Because that's the bias, that's the subjectivity in it. Just the fact that it's present, because if it wasn't, everybody would be held to the same standard, and this wouldn't be allowed. That being said, that brings me to my final point about just how bad the racism is and how ugly it is when you aren't white or aren't a Mexican fighter. Because when it's the black fighter, it's a different ball game. So, August 25th, Jamal Charlo, middleweight champion, he was booked in San Antonio. He turned himself in to authorities in regard to 3 felony warrants that were issued on his name. Now, the warrants, the 3 felony burglary warrants, were issued in his name in connection to a situation that took place July 16th. So July 16th, Jamal Charlo was accused of assaulting a waitress and stealing her tips. That's what reports say. That's what local media reports without speaking with him, only speaking to employees of the venue of which this situation took place. So Charlo's attorney comes forward with a statement saying Charlo stole no money, made no threats. Waitress claims card is missing upon second pay request. Charlo took his ID from her. He was escorted out of the club, attempted to pay via phone call a couple hours after. So he attempted to pay several hours after he left the club via phone call. The club refused to take a payment. The club owner wanted to drop the charges, but police wanted to pursue to embarrass. Jamal Charlo took nothing but what he was owed. End quote from Charlo's attorney, Kent Schaefer. Now, from the report, the reports clearly read to me, from their point of view, from their gathering and how they worded things, Charlo was at a club. He had drinks. He sought to pay out his tab so he could leave. He gave the waitress his card. She ran the card. She came back and told him that the card was declined. He asked her to run it again. She goes to run the card again and returns and says she's misplaced the card. So Charlo takes his ID, or in another report, he took her booklet, you know, the booklet that most servers carry around, that house your cards and your receipt for payment. Took that from her to retrieve his ID so she wouldn't lose that as well. Possibly had some tips in it. That's neither here nor there. But upon retrieving his ID from her, he was asked to leave the club. Him and his team had to push their way out of the club. At which time they leave. He returns home. He has his assistant reach out to the club to try to make an attempt to pay them for his tab using a different card, because the original card in question was never recovered. But he does attempt via his assistant to pay the club the tab he owes. The club refuses to accept payment, and the club owner was not looking to press charges, but the police were looking to further agitate the situation. Okay, so the issue in all of this is how one-sided the narrative is. Because the words that were used to, the headlines surrounding this are all aggressive. Charlo steals from waitress. Charlo steals tips from waitress. Charlo assaults waitress, bullies waitress. And people with common sense are going to understand the frustration in your server losing your debit or credit card from my table to the register. This is your one job. You take orders and you collect payment. How do you lose my card from my table to the register? Makes no sense. That part, that makes no sense. And okay, because there's so much that just, you know, comes to my head when I read this story. Okay, some of the, because how the media spun this story and the words that they use keywords to create a narrative that Jamal Charlo is an aggressive person. Now, beyond him being a boxer, you know, you don't typically know about these people's personal lives, but it's easier to paint the picture of Charlo being an aggressive individual with his profession, with him being a professional boxer. So they use words like Charlo and his entourage pushed their way out of the club. Charlo stole money from her. And they even brought up the fact that the previous year, in 2020, Charlo was investigated over a suspected assault that had nothing to do with this incident involving the waitress and his debit card that was not recovered. So the point in them bringing up a suspected assault that has no backbone, no real fact to support that an assault actually took place, is to create a narrative that, oh, he's had trouble in the past outside of the boxing ring, so this is repeated behavior, this is repeated bad behavior. So they're trying to create a narrative that, oh, he's trouble, he's a troublemaker, he has issues controlling his temper. You know, they want to make him seem less than human. They want to paint him out to be a villain. So it's easier for the people consuming the media to demonize him and to side with the waitress and to just paint Charlo as this horrible person who deserves no sympathy and no understanding. That's the goal with the words that they use and how they painted it. Because to know so little about what took place, the narrative is clear. The narrative is very clear on how they wanted him to be perceived when all of this was said and done. It's frustrating, and a lot of people can relate to when you hand out your card to a server to pay your tab, and then a couple of days later you see charges on your card for stuff that you have no interest in. You $13.99 for a Netflix account and you subscribe to Hulu, or $60 for a purchase off PSN and you get an Xbox, or a subscription to Amazon Prime and you're okay with waiting the 4 days for your package to get to your house. You know, so imagine being a professional and you hand your card to a server to pay for maybe $40 worth of drinks, and your server returns to you telling you that your card was declined. You instruct your server to run your card again. They go attempt to run your card again, only to return and say, oh, the card has now been misplaced, I don't know where it is. And as this professional, you're a multi-million-dollar earning professional. A multi-million-dollar earning professional. So you got upwards of most likely $500K on a bad day in this account to pay for $40 worth of drinks. And I'm not supposed to be upset? If my card declined, why wouldn't you bring it back to me the first time? Why keep a card that declines? Why keep a card at all? Unless my tab is open. But obviously his tab wasn't open. Not to mention the fact that all of the media reports were one-sided, you know, painting Charlo as the aggressor and never even entertaining the idea to look at things from his perspective or just to investigate the story fairly. Because when you fail to look at things from both all possible perspectives, you succeed in alienating one party over the other. What you do succeed in is proving a bias, which is what the media often does to black fighters. It's a shame. It's a shame because nobody deserves that. 3 felony warrants. 3 felony warrants over a missing debit card. I'm the one that's really wronged. A missing debit card. It's very easy to steal card information. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. Most people have been victim at some point or another. Just last year, I had my card being charged for Amazon Prime accounts that I've never paid for, never even considered paying for, but it happened to me. I have no idea on how this person got my information, but it happens. But Charlo received 3 warrants were issued. 3 felony warrants were issued in his name. And for what? For retrieving his ID? For stealing some tips that we can't even give a number on? We can't even guess. No report even threw out a guess on how much money he quote unquote stole from the waitress. And they never, nor do they want to explore the issue of the missing debit card. So I don't know, man. It's a shame and how the media will try to destroy men of color. Yeah, and how they so quickly attempt to strip us of our humanity and all understanding, even in the smallest of situations. That's all I got for y'all, man. That's all I got for y'all, man. This was a pretty long episode, especially to be on the topic of boxing. Really long episode. That's all I got for y'all this episode, man. There are more things there are things that I have been wanting to talk about. I really want to press those issues when I get back home with DeMarco to get that to get his feedback, and I want to bring other people onto the show to get their feedback as well. It's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. Men and women, the relationships between men and women, the the roles that men and women play in society and at home are things that I want to explore, because there's a lot of there have been a lot of debates, a lot of men versus women debates, debating what the roles are that each party is supposed to play, that I would say have been re-sparked by Kevin Samuels. I find it to be a really interesting debate, so I really want to get into that. I really want to have that debate. But I want to get some women on the show to have that debate with, to weigh in on that, and to diversify the perception on the topic versus just hearing it from two guys. I really want to get some women on there to explain themselves. You know what I'm saying? Explain how they see things and why they see the things the way they do. I'd also like to explore a conversation surrounding homosexuality, because it's so layered. It's so layered. It's not just men. It's not just as simple as men dating men and women dating women. You got women that pose as men to date women. You have men that pose as women to date men, and I'm a little confused on that. I would really like to explore the mind of somebody that lives their lifestyle and just kind of explain, what life is like and what drives some of those urges to maybe shift your image from what you biologically are to what you would like to be. It's like that. It confuses me because that's not a lifestyle that I live, and I would just like to sit and have an honest conversation with several people from that community to explore that and explain that, and just get an understanding, because I don't have an understanding of it. So I would really like to sit back and have a conversation with some homosexual people to get an understanding on some things. That's all that really comes to mind. That's all that really comes to mind as far as other topics that have been on my mind as of late. That being said, man, make sure y'all like, share, subscribe, comment on the videos, man. I really need y'all to comment. I would really like for y'all to comment. I really need y'all to subscribe. If you're watching, subscribe to the page, because the content is going to keep on coming. Turn on those post notifications so you don't miss anything. And just don't forget to turn up and tune in with your boy here, TP, with Rich Talks. I'm out. Peace.